My husband's disappearance was a cover for a massive organized scheme, leaving me with evidence that carries a severe accusation. Now, an internal security team is at my door, and I have to run before I'm framed and locked away for dozens of years. The fairy lights were still strung across the living room, stubbornly refusing to acknowledge that the magic of Christmas had evaporated sometime around January 2nd. I remember staring at the tiny, twinkling stars reflected in the crystal of my champagne flute, the last dregs of a celebratory bottle I'd bought for two. My husband, Mark, had insisted we save it for something special. Well, this was certainly special. It was January 5th, a Tuesday. The air in our otherwise cozy suburban home felt brittle, like thin ice ready to crack under the slightest pressure. Mark had left for work as usual on Monday morning, kissing me goodbye with that distracted, slightly rushed affection he'd adopted over the last few months. "See you tonight, darling. Big presentation tomorrow. Wish me luck," he'd said, tying his expensive silk tie in the hall mirror. I'd wished him luck, thinking nothing of it. He always had big presentations. Mark was a senior partner at a highly respected financial firm downtown, the kind of man whose life was measured in quarterly reports and flawless networking. I found the note tucked under the porcelain sugar bowl on the kitchen island. That was the first thing that sent a shiver down my spine. Mark never left notes. If he was running late, he'd text. If he was stopping for takeout, he'd call. Everything important was spoken, debated, or signed in triplicate. This was handwritten, on heavy cream-colored stationery, the kind he claimed to hate because it wrinkled too easily. The handwriting was unmistakably his, sharp, precise, almost architectural. But the words were an earthquake. "Sarah, I can't do this anymore. I know this is cowardly, but I don't have the strength to tell you to your face. Everything we built feels like a cage now, and I can't breathe. Please don't try to find me. I've already left the country. Everything financial is being handled by my lawyer. You won't be left wanting. I needed a clean break. I needed freedom. I found it. I am sorry for the pain this will cause, but I have to choose myself just this once. Goodbye. Mark." My first reaction wasn't grief. It was confusion. A clean break? He left the country? This wasn't Mark. Mark booked a holiday 6 months in advance. Mark double-checked his passport expiry date before boarding a domestic flight. This note sounded like something ripped from a cheap movie script. I reread it. I found it. Found what? Freedom. Or someone else. The mention of the lawyer and the financials did little to soothe the growing knot in my stomach. Mark was meticulous. If he said he was handling things, he had. I walked straight to his home office. The door usually locked when he was working from home, but now it stood slightly ajar. The room was too neat, too sterile. His laptop was gone. His briefcase was gone, but it was the filing cabinet that drew my attention. The bottom drawer, usually housing tax documents from 5 years prior, was hanging open, slightly askew. I pulled it out fully. It was empty. Not just empty of papers, but wiped clean. Panic started to set in, a cold dread replacing the initial shock. I leaned against the desk, rubbing my temples, trying to think rationally. If he'd truly just run off with a mistress, why the elaborate setup? Why leave the house intact? Why mention the lawyer unless he knew I'd check? Then I saw it. Taped almost invisibly to the underside of the desk drawer, right where I'd been looking for the missing files, was a second piece of paper. This one wasn't cream stationery. It was a crumpled receipt from a 24-hour international shipping service, dated December 30th. It listed a single package destination, a private P.O. box in a remote coastal town in Chile. That wasn't the cliffhanger. The real break in reality came when I picked up the heavy, leather-bound photo album from the top shelf, the one we supposedly filled with honeymoon pictures. It felt unusually heavy. I flipped it open, expecting faded pictures of us by the Aegean Sea. Instead, the pages had been meticulously hollowed out. Inside the cavity lay a single unmarked USB drive and a small folded piece of dark blue fabric. It was part of a uniform patch. I pulled the fabric free, my fingers trembling. It wasn't the kind of fabric you found in a nice suit or a casual sweater. It was thick, tactical, and faintly smelled of oil and something metallic. Etched into the worn stitching of the patch were 3 distinct stylized letters: CIT. I recognized those letters instantly. They stood for the Consolidated Investigation Team, the unit responsible for investigating high-level corporate fraud, and sometimes matters far more serious, often involving accusations of activities that could be classified as a severe threat to national economic stability. Mark had always scoffed at the idea of anything like that touching his world. I grabbed the USB, my heart hammering against my ribs, and plugged it into the desktop computer I kept specifically for backing up family photos, the one Mark never touched. It asked for a password. I typed our wedding date. Denied. I typed his mother's birthday. Denied. I typed freedom. Denied. Defeated, I was about to yank it out when my eyes landed back on the note. I needed to choose myself just this once. And then it hit me. The presentation he was supposedly preparing for on January 6th. It wasn't a quarterly review. It was the presentation he was supposed to give to the board detailing the security vulnerabilities in the firm's international transfer protocols, the same protocols that were flagged by a federal audit 6 months ago, an audit Mark had assured me he'd managed to bury. I tried one last password, a desperate dark guess derived from a conversation I'd once accidentally overheard him having months ago, a hushed phone call about needing to make the problem disappear. I typed the only word that felt truly dangerous: cover-up. The drive sprang open. It wasn't filled with incriminating financial spreadsheets. It was filled with encrypted surveillance footage, hundreds of video files, and one single, chillingly explicit document titled Protocol Nightingale: Asset Extraction and Compromise. The first video file opened automatically. It showed Mark standing in what looked like a dimly lit hangar, but he wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing tactical gear, and he wasn't talking to a mistress. He was standing next to 2 men, both carrying what looked suspiciously like illegal weaponry, shaking hands over a large wooden crate. And then, the camera panned over the crate just before it was loaded onto a private jet. Stenciled clearly on the side of the crate, under layers of military-grade tape, was the logo of the very financial firm he worked for. Mark hadn't just run away with someone. He'd sold out, and the note he left me wasn't a breakup letter. It was a warning. I looked down at the USB drive, realizing I was now holding evidence of something that could lead to a charge of severe economic sabotage, accusations that carried weight far beyond simple embezzlement. I had just accessed a digital ghost trail leading directly to what looked like organized scheme trafficking, classified corporate secrets, possibly even involving things that warranted a full-scale investigation by the highest level of internal security. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the cheerful chime of a neighbor. It was a single, sharp, impatient buzz, repeated twice. I looked out the window, my breath catching in my throat. Parked silently at the curb, blending in perfectly with the suburban afternoon, was a long, black, unmarked sedan. And stepping out of the driver's side door was a man in a very dark suit, looking directly at my house, holding a thin, official-looking file. He wasn't looking for Mark. He was looking for the evidence Mark had left behind. And now I was holding it. My blood turned to ice water. The man at the door wasn't the police. He looked too controlled, too precise, like someone whose job it was to erase loose ends rather than collect them. He glanced at his watch with an unsettling lack of urgency, then started walking up the driveway, his polished shoes crunching deliberately on the gravel path. He knew I was home. Mark's sloppy exit had triggered something, and this individual was the cleanup crew. My mind raced. The USB drive was still glowing on the screen. If I shut down the computer, it might flag an alert on their end. If I ran, I was admitting guilt by fleeing. I scrambled back to the desk, my hands shaking so violently I nearly knocked over the monitor. I had seconds. I yanked the USB drive out, shoving it deep into the pocket of my robe, the sharp edge of the casing digging painfully into my hip. I slammed the photo album shut, tossing it back onto the shelf with practiced carelessness. I lunged for the monitor, frantically closing the video player and navigating to a safe, innocuous document. A recipe for gluten-free blueberry muffins I'd been meaning to try. The buzz came again, louder this time, a demanding vibration in the quiet house. I plastered the warmest, most bewildered smile I could manage onto my face and hurried to the front door, gripping the brass knob. I took one deep breath, channeling every scene from every spy movie Mark had ever mocked me for watching. I opened the door just enough to see the man clearly. He was tall, lean, with eyes the color of slate, and he wore a faint, utterly professional expression of weary authority. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice only slightly higher than usual. "Can I help you? I'm afraid I'm expecting a delivery driver. Perhaps you have a package." He didn't smile back. He held up a slim black wallet, flashed an identification badge for a fraction of a second, enough time for me to register the official seal but not the name, and then snapped it shut. "Mrs. Davies, my name is Agent Hayes. I represent a division within the service responsible for internal corporate compliance. We're conducting a routine follow-up regarding your husband, Mr. Mark Davies, and his recent, unplanned absence." "Oh, Mark," I sighed, injecting just the right amount of bewildered wife into the performance. "It's been such a nightmare. I was just about to call the authorities. He left this utterly insane note, Agent Hayes. Ran off to South America, he claims. Can you imagine? He hasn't answered his phone since Monday." Hayes's eyes scanned the hallway behind me, lingering momentarily on the doorway to the office. He wasn't fooled by the performance, but he seemed to be calculating the quickest route to confirm my story. "We understand," he said smoothly, taking half a step forward, forcing me to brace my shoulder against the door to keep him out. "That's why we're here. We need to verify a few administrative details. Might we come inside for just a moment? It's imperative we confirm he didn't leave under duress or with sensitive materials." "Sensitive materials?" I echoed, feigning confusion. "Mark just dealt with hedge funds, Agent. The most sensitive thing he handles is our retirement portfolio." "Indeed," Hayes murmured, his gaze sharpening as he noticed the faint shimmer of the Christmas lights still visible in the living room. "Mrs. Davies, for security purposes, we need to know if he took his personal electronic devices, specifically his work laptop or any external storage." This was the moment. If I let him in, he'd find the empty drawer, the receipt, and eventually, he'd search me. He looked too organized for me to talk my way out of an in-depth search. "Agent," I said, my tone shifting slightly, dropping the helpless wife act for something closer to challenge. "I'm not obstructing anything, but I haven't had time to process this myself. I'm deeply distressed. If this is an official matter of national security, shouldn't I have a warrant? Or at least, shouldn't your superior agency be handling this?" Hayes's posture stiffened. He hadn't expected resistance, especially not from the grieving spouse. "Mrs. Davies, the situation involves proprietary information that, if compromised, could lead to a very serious accusation against your husband, one that could easily be interpreted as a calculated attempt to destabilize critical financial infrastructure. We are trying to resolve this quietly. Cooperate now, and this remains an administrative issue. Resist, and we escalate immediately." He used the word escalate, and I knew what that meant. It meant his quiet visit would become a very public, very terrifying intrusion involving official mandates and potentially a whole team of people just as chillingly composed as he was. My heart pounded a desperate rhythm against the USB drive in my pocket. I had to buy time. I needed to get the drive to a place where it could be decoded safely, a place Mark never knew about. The old university library, perhaps? A public computer far from here? "Look," I said, leaning in conspiratorially, lowering my voice. "I'm happy to cooperate, but I need a moment to pull myself together. I haven't eaten. Can you give me 20 minutes? I'll make coffee. We can discuss the portfolio issue calmly. I just need to use the restroom first." Hayes hesitated. 20 minutes was too long for a trained operative, but my performance had seemed authentic enough to warrant a slight delay. He needed to confirm my emotional state wasn't a bluff. 15 minutes, Mrs. Davies. Not a second more. I'll wait right here." I nodded, pulling the door almost shut but leaving a hair's breadth gap, just enough to confirm I was locking the deadbolt behind me. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on his through the crack. I reached the office, grabbed my keys, and looked back at the closed door. 15 minutes. I made it to the garage, slid into the driver's seat of my beat-up SUV, the car Mark insisted I keep for running errands, so his Lexus wouldn't be seen too often near the house, and slammed the door. I fumbled with the ignition, the engine roaring to life far too loudly in the suburban silence. I threw the car into reverse, tires squealing slightly as I pulled out of the driveway, glancing frantically into my side mirror. Agent Hayes was still standing exactly where I'd left him, but now he was talking rapidly into a device hidden near his ear. He looked up just as I sped past. He didn't look angry. He looked calculating. I floored the accelerator, peeling around the corner, my mind already calculating routes to the city center, when my phone buzzed violently in the center console. It was a text message, sent from an unknown, untraceable number. It wasn't a threat. It was a single image. A picture of the black sedan, Agent Hayes standing beside it, and superimposed over the photo in glowing red text was one chilling sentence. "Nice try, Sarah, but Mark forgot to tell you. We monitor all outbound traffic within a 2-mile radius of high-value assets." My heart stopped. I hadn't even made it 2 miles. The phone buzzed again immediately with a second message, this time a short video clip, taken just moments ago. It was a dashboard camera view from the black sedan. It showed me driving furiously away, my face contorted in panic. And as the camera zoomed in on my passenger seat, I saw it. The reflection of the USB drive, briefly visible as it caught the sunlight streaming through my window, right next to my purse. They weren't looking for Mark anymore. They were looking for the drive. And they knew exactly where I was going. The dashboard camera footage was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. They weren't just monitoring the house. They were tracking the vehicle, anticipating the panic response, and ensuring that I couldn't escape with the evidence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for freedom. If they caught me now, the administrative issue Hayes had mentioned would become a very real, very serious accusation, perhaps even involving charges related to undermining economic stability, the kind of heavy leverage used against high-profile targets. I slammed on the brakes, the SUV screeching in protest on the suburban street. I couldn't go to the library, it was too predictable, too public, and now they knew my mode of transport. I had to ditch the car and the drive immediately. I wrenched the wheel hard, pulling into the narrow driveway of an old, dilapidated laundromat that looked like it hadn't seen a customer since the 90s. I killed the engine, plunging the car into sudden, heavy silence. The USB drive felt like a searing coal in my pocket. I had maybe 3 minutes before Hayes' team, because I knew now it wasn't just Hayes, would realize I'd stopped moving towards the city and started hiding. I grabbed the drive, my eyes scanning the laundromat's interior through the grimy glass. It was deserted. Perfect. I didn't need a secure computer. I needed a disposable transfer point. I burst through the door, the bell above jingling a ridiculously cheerful sound in the tense quiet. The place smelled overwhelmingly of bleach and stale heat. I spotted a row of ancient top-loading washing machines in the back corner. These weren't smart appliances. They were relics, probably running on simple mechanical timers. I chose the furthest machine, number 14, which was currently empty save for a pile of forgotten damp socks in the drum. My hands moved with a desperate clarity I hadn't known I possessed. I popped the lid of the machine. I didn't have tools, so I used the sharp metal edge of an expired dryer sheet box to pry open the small access panel near the base of the machine, the panel that housed the elementary control circuitry. It was clumsy, but effective. Wires were exposed. I took the USB drive, holding it carefully by the plastic casing. I didn't dare try to plug it into anything exposed. Instead, I noticed the exposed data line for the coin mechanism, a simple 4-pin connector that still had residual current for the machine's timer. It was a long shot, a technique I vaguely remembered from an obscure IT forum Mark had once forced me to read about to understand data security vulnerabilities. I stripped the thin insulation off 2 of the data pins on the USB drive with my teeth, tasting cheap plastic and desperation, and quickly, awkwardly, bridged the connection across the coin slot pins on the washing machine circuitry. It was a crude, direct injection method. I was hoping the machine's primitive power supply wouldn't instantly fry the sensitive chip, but instead provide just enough juice for a rapid, near-instantaneous data dump onto any residual memory buffer still running in the ancient machine's control board. The moment the connection snapped into place, the lights in the entire laundromat flickered violently, and machine number 14 started humming, not like it was washing, but like an overloaded transformer. A thin wisp of smoke curled up from the access panel. I pulled the connection away instantly, yanked the USB drive out, and shoved it back into my robe pocket. The smoke cleared. The machine went silent. I didn't know if the data transfer was successful or if the drive was now just an inert piece of plastic. I ran back out to the car, peeling away from the laundromat before Hayes could possibly have driven there from my house. I headed straight for the one place I knew was chaotic, public, and filled with people who minded their own business, the massive, multi-level parking garage beneath the main city library. I parked on the 3rd floor, found a quiet corner, and pulled out my own personal, heavily encrypted laptop, the one Mark thought was just for writing book reports. I plugged in the USB drive. It was registering. It was readable. I opened the folder. Protocol Nightingale was there. The surveillance footage was there. The evidence that Mark hadn't just run away, but had been operating as a deep cover informant, attempting to expose a massive internal network that was funneling corporate assets out of the country through shell corporations, was all laid bare. The group he'd been running from, the one Hayes represented, was trying to retrieve the data before Mark could hand it over to the legitimate authorities, using the breakup as a smokescreen. The final file on the drive was a short video from Mark himself, time-stamped 2 hours before he left the note. He looked pale, terrified, standing in a dimly lit hotel room. "Sarah, if you are seeing this, the extraction failed, or I was compromised before I could meet the handler. I had to stage the runaway act to cover my tracks while I gathered enough proof to take down the entire network. Hayes' people, they are too deeply embedded. They aren't the cleanup crew for the thieves. They are the thieves, running interference under the guise of internal security. They want this drive because it ties them directly to the high-level illegal transfers. I couldn't trust anyone at work, so I left the drive hidden with you. I'm going dark, meeting the true federal contact tonight. If you are listening to this, go to the courthouse steps downtown, bring the drive, and ask for Special Agent Ramirez. Tell her you have the Nightingale data. It's the only way I can clear my name and keep you safe. I love you. Don't trust anyone who claims to be helping me." As the video ended, I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching the stairwell entrance on my level of the garage. They hadn't lost me. They had tracked the car, and the laundromat stop, while buying me a few precious minutes, had only confirmed my destination. I slammed the laptop shut, but not before rapidly copying the entire Nightingale file structure onto my encrypted cloud storage, set to auto-delete the local copies after 60 seconds. I grabbed the laptop and the original USB drive. I burst out of the stairwell onto the 3rd floor, spotting the familiar silhouette of Agent Hayes leaning against a concrete pillar about 30 feet away, now joined by 2 other grim-faced figures. Hayes had pulled his weapon. It wasn't for show. "Mrs. Davies, drop the electronic devices now!" Hayes' voice echoed off the concrete. I looked past them, down the long, empty ramp leading to the 2nd floor. I had seconds before they closed the distance. I didn't run down the ramp. Instead, I vaulted over the low concrete barrier separating the parking level from the central open-air void of the garage. I didn't jump to my death. I jumped onto the roof of a passing delivery truck, a massive refrigerated trailer that was slowly descending to the 2nd floor, having just completed a drop-off. The impact nearly knocked the air from my lungs, but the truck's momentum carried me forward. Hayes and his men rushed to the edge just as the truck disappeared around the next curve. They were too late to shoot without risking hitting civilians or damaging vital infrastructure. They were too dedicated to the subtlety of an administrative cleanup to risk a public shootout. The truck continued its slow descent. I clung to the edge of the roof, the cold biting through my thin robe, the laptop bag digging into my shoulder. As the truck shuddered to a halt on the second floor, I vaulted off, blending instantly into the shadows behind a stack of empty pallets. I ran, not towards the main exit, but deeper into the labyrinth of parked cars. I emerged near the library entrance just as the sun began to set, painting the sky a violent, blood orange. I looked up at the imposing stone facade of the courthouse building across the square. Ramirez, Nightingale Data. I pulled out my phone, praying the encryption held against their local tracking efforts long enough for one call. I dialed the number listed on Mark's final video file, my voice steadying with adrenaline and grim resolve. "I need to speak to Special Agent Ramirez," I said clearly into the receiver, my eyes locked on the courthouse steps. "Tell her Sarah Davies is here, and tell her that I have the only evidence that will keep my husband alive and expose the entire network he tried to burn down." The sirens were faintly audible now, coming from the direction of the parking garage, but I was already moving, a former suburban wife turned unlikely courier, running toward the only possible salvation, justice, with the proof of her husband's double life clutched tightly in her hand.